Hi, it's KCCK's Culture Call. I'm Dennis Green, and if it's Tuesday, this must be Steve Shanley Day on KCCK with the Muni Band, but really, every day is Steve Shanley Day.
That's what my mother would say, yes.
Week number 4. We're almost halfway through already.
Flying through the season. Man. Yeah, some years week 4 ends up being Patriotic Week. Not this year. This year is one of those week 5 Patriotic Weeks. So.
Yeah, our calendar is strange this year because Jazz Fest, Jazz Under the Stars, everything just feels a little bit off because we're at the month starts at the end of the week. Often this year.
Yes, yeah.
And that screws up all the weekly things.
And the local school teachers would say the same thing. Oh, we're used to this concert happening the first week in December, and this year it had to be the second week, and threw everything off. So throws everything off, including KCCK and the Cedar Rapids Municipal Band. So we're all there with you.
So what's up this week?
We got a lot of stuff packed into this week. We are featuring our Young Artist Competition runner-up from Xavier High School, Ben Allard, on the trombone. So excited to feature him. Also bringing back Kelsey Madsen, who sang with the band way back in 2013. And she is back in the area now as a music teacher in public school, also at Orchestra Iowa and with the Eastern Iowa Arts Academy.
Sings with the group Vibe,
Sings with the group Vibe as well. And thought it would be fun to have her come back and sing a couple of selections with us again. And that's also just fun for me because she was my neighbor when we were growing up. My sister babysat her, in fact. So always fun to have Kelsey back with the group, wonderful singer and performer. So she'll be singing a couple from the Great American Songbook, Mac the Knife, and They Can't Take That Away From Me. And when those 3 selections, Kelsey's and Ben's, aren't happening, we are doing our tribute to Morgan Jones, who just passed away this last year and was the conductor of the band, the 3rd permanent conductor of the band, right before I took over.
And did you perform in the band with Morgan?
I did, yes. So I was in the percussion section for about 10 years, and I did percussion and also some synthesizer and keyboard. And he was the director that hired me, and I learned a lot about how to program for a summer band concert that is 1 hour long and is going to have an audience and musicians in the band of varying experience levels and just varying tastes.
He was also the director of the Hawkeye Marching Band. He was Hawkeye Marching Band director when I was at the University of Iowa.
Yes, and then he retired, and then he unretired, came back and helped
like you
out.
do.
But yes, that's what happens to all of us, I think. And yes, was probably at the time the perfect person to take over for Frank Pearsall, who was director of bands for a long time at the University of Iowa and directed the municipal band during the 1970s and 80s. And Frank largely was responsible for converting it from more of an amateur group into a refined professional group. And Morgan certainly took up the mantle on that and had just a great way that I still try to emulate to this day of how he spoke to the crowd. I loved just the cadence of his voice, and everybody just loved listening to him talk and tell stories. And I think that was one of his real gifts, was connecting with the audience in that way that made them want to show up for those concerts.
You and I have talked about that in other arenas than this, about the importance of whoever the band leader is, whether it's conductor or band member, knowing what and how much and having a plan for what comes in between the songs.
Exactly. And Morgan, I notice in all of the scores, that's what the conductors look at to conduct the band, would have some note cards on the front of the score with just some little talking points, or he might have something highlighted in the notes that the conductor provided. So he was doing it a lot more extemporaneously than I was. I write out every word I'm going to say because, as we've talked about, for me, that is when I get to take my break. when I'm conducting the group and trying to keep it together, I'm working very hard. So in between, when the musicians are taking a break, I like to take a break too. And if my notes are just written out in, it appears larger and larger font every year, I am able to just read that and take a breather and relax my brain. Every once in a while, I'll get mad that I'll catch a typo, and even a typo that doesn't affect the audience, like an apostrophe S where there wasn't supposed to be one. That was in the Gershwin medley last week, and every time I saw it, I got mad that I did that, even though, of course, up until now, I was the only one who knew that was there.
That's right, but now you've outed yourself to the whole community.
But yeah, Morgan was great, better than I was at just winging it, and I thought that was a really important thing. And when I auditioned for the band, that I took just as seriously as the music that I selected and how I would work with the group and the rehearsals, because to me, how that person communicated with the audience was just as important as the music that happened in between.
I call it being a good DJ.
Yes.
Because that's what we do here on the radio, is we want to come on in between the songs, that we know that's why you're here, but we want the content that we provide to illuminate and be something else that you enjoy, hopefully on a par with the music. And I think you do an exceptional job of that. I always learn something when I hear what you have to say in between each song.
Thank you. And I feel that the process of figuring out what I am going to tell an audience also helps me figure out if I did a good job of programming the music or not. So if I can't put it into very general, consumable terminology, then I can realize, okay, so I really appreciate this piece of music, and the musicians really appreciate this piece of music, but it's kind of for complicated or weird reasons that maybe the audience isn't going to appreciate, because I'm having trouble coming up with just a nice, pleasant way to introduce this. But usually that isn't the case. Most pieces of music, there's a nice story about how it was composed or about the conductor, and I love doing the research for it too. If I didn't have to talk to the audience about it, I'm not sure sometimes I would do that research. Also, to be fair, Morgan and Frank didn't really have the full-blown internet that I have today.
Yeah, it was a lot harder for them.
Yes. So they just probably were used to it, and now I can just see, oh, the Los Angeles Philharmonic already did some clever program notes on this. I can liberally borrow those as I give my notes to the audience.
Is there an occasion you can remember where there was one particular little tidbit that you learned that has really stuck with you? I know something that was surprising or unexpected, or as you look, and I know we're going back over hundreds and hundreds of things, but there is probably something that sticks in your mind where you go, wow, this is a really cool little fact / stories.
It's the most recent one that would come to mind, and that was 2 weeks ago in week 2. I programmed a John Philip Sousa march, and because marches are so predictable and follow this pretty much same form and have for forever now, you just assume that the composer thought, I'm now going to write a march, and now I'm going to write another march, and this march will be faster, this march will be in this key, but that there often isn't a great story behind it. There might be a tone poem or something with a little bit more flexible form behind it. But what I have discovered is that the stories behind so many of John Philip Sousa's marches are really fascinating. Either the composition process itself, which isn't as common because he was one of those sort of Bach that he just had melodies in his head and they just kept coming out up until the day that he died. But the impetus for why they needed to be written, a lot of very fascinating things. So there is a tower in downtown Minneapolis that looks like the Washington Monument that a lot of people are familiar with, and it's called the Fauché Tower. And I have known that for years. I didn't know anything about it. And then David Lang recommended the Fauché Tower Washington Memorial March. And I did a little bit of digging into that and found out that Wilbur Fauché, the utilities magnate, had built this tower, and he was obsessed with the Washington Monument. So he wanted it to basically look like the Washington Monument. So that's why it looked that way. And for the opening of it, he wanted the Sousa Band to come and play. Sousa Band didn't want to play. he made it worth their while financially. Sousa Band came to play, and there wasn't enough time for Sousa to write this march for the occasion, so he took a march that he wrote for a different occasion and hadn't premiered yet, and just said, yeah, we're just going to call this the march that I wrote. And it was a really cool march, and everything went swimmingly. And then he did some naughty stuff with the taxpayers' money and accounting, not Sousa, Fauché, and got sent to prison. And then Sousa did not want this march in the public because he didn't want to be associated with this. So it was buried for decades. And then it finally, in the mid-'70s, came back out, and now we're all playing it again. But just things like that, you hear this march and it's, oh, that's a nice little march. And then you never realize that it maybe was never going to get heard if Sousa would have had his way.
That's right, because of tax evasion.
Because of tax evasion, exactly. So, yeah, there are some little things like that over the years that I've picked up on. And, of course, the audience loves those stories as well.
The Cedar Rapids Municipal Band in action this week, Wednesday and Sunday. And where will the band be?
The band will be at Johnson Elementary in the parking lot, which is one of my favorite locations. I love it. So I love going into the southeast side and playing at schools. I think that's cool, and to get into different neighborhoods. So we'll be there at 7:30 on Wednesday and 7:30 at Ellis Park on Sunday.
And on the web, if people want more information, they can find it on Facebook, and then the website is
crmuniband.org. And I do need to give one quick shout out that to program I couldn't get all of Morgan's favorites in this week, but I emailed a number of members of the band who were in his groups for a long time, and it was pretty fun. I got a selection of about 40 titles to choose from, and then
so there was some consensus
of narrowing it down. Yeah, but that was a fun part, and wouldn't have been able to put it together without some of those members coming forth and reminding me, like, oh yeah, Fandango, I forgot he liked that one. Yeah.
All right, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Dennis.
You can hear the Culture Crawl live on the radio most weekdays at 10:30, on demand at kcck.org/culture, or subscribe using your favorite podcast player. Watch our videos on the KCCK Facebook and YouTube channels. Our producer is Lydia Kilgore. The Culture Crawl theme is composed by Vivian Shanley. I'm Dennis Green, and I'll talk to you later.